They have been described by the United Nations as one of the most persecuted minorities in the world. Since 2015, the Rohingyas of Myanmar have been the target of an increasingly brutal state crackdown. So-called clearance operations have left more than 3,000 dead, many more wounded, tortured, raped, and villages burned to the ground. In the midst of this carnage, the Canadian government has sent former Ontario Premier Bob Rae to the region as a special envoy. He has already issued one interim report and will head back to the region next month to follow up. And Bob Rae joins us now for an update. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Good to see you.
Let's start from the assumption that not everybody knows about this group or this story. So we do want to bring up this background just to get everybody up to scratch here. The Rohingya people are a Muslim ethnic group. There are approximately 1.1 million who live in Myanmar. They've resided in the region since the 12th century. More than 600,000 had fled for Bangladesh in 2017. Myanmar views them as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. Canadians have contributed more than $37 million to this crisis. Okay, the Prime Minister has tasked you with a mission in this case. What is it?
The mission is to report to him on what we can do, to give him an analysis on the ground. I think initially I was appointed just before a series of summit meetings in Asia. He wanted to be, briefed and up to speed with the latest on the ground that I could give him, which I was able to do. And I met with him and with Aung San Suu Kyi in Da Nang in November, the Prime Minister, and we were able to kind of look at what the next steps would be. And now he clearly wants recommendations for me on the three areas that I've identified as critical. The first is the condition of the camps, which is a serious issue. The second is, what is the political reconciliation process in Myanmar? Is it a real thing? What can we do to encourage it, to help it? And third is, how do we deal with this issue of accountability, which is an increasingly important issue internationally? How do we make sure the people who are responsible for atrocities of one kind and another are brought to account? And all of that in the context of countries working together and trying to figure out how we build a stronger group of countries that are willing and able to take some steps in concert, working in a positive way.
Okay, let's go through your list here. Then the conditions the Rohingya are now living in refugee camps, what are those conditions like?
Appalling. I mean, it's the fastest growing refugee situation between August of last year, 2017, and up till now. Over 650,000 people living in very, very crowded conditions in basically makeshift camps that have just been created out of land that was there.
Are they at least safe there?
Well, they're safe in the sense that militarily it seems to be secure. It's not, but the two other conditions for safety are, one, epidemics, which you have a lot of people living very, very close together. I mean, imagine the numbers, right? 650,000 people, plus another 300,000 who are living in the vicinity, who've been there over many, many years of back and forth across the border in terms of repression. So there's close to 1 million Rohingya living in Bangladesh, and there are more Rohingya living outside Myanmar than there are living in Myanmar. The number left in Myanmar is estimated to be about 300,000 or so. So, the camp condition is a real priority for me, because the idea that this is all going to be over, quickly. No. Right. This is a long-term problem, and a lot of the UN and all the international agencies have a lot of difficulty getting the donors to appreciate the fact that they've got to be there for the long term. And so that's something I continue to believe is really important for Canada, and it's important for everybody else. So that's critical. The other, of course, is the weather. The rainy season comes when the monsoons come. The potential, you've seen in California what can happen, where you have very sophisticated, advanced infrastructure, what can happen in terms of mudslides and
people die.
And when the forest goes, and a lot of the forest was cut down to make room for the camps, and they're on hills. So when the rains come, it's going to be very tough. And I think people need to understand that the conditions in the camp are for me a very, very serious priority for the world, and we can't. In today's media world, we tend to lose attention. We tend to lose focus. That was last week's news. This is next week's news. This problem is here for a long time. We need to figure out how to sustain our attention and our effort on that question.
Well, to that end, have you had access to political or military decision makers in the region?
I had good access obviously I met with Aung San Suu Kyi, and I've met with the Bangladeshi leadership a great deal, and they're very much involved. The Bangladeshi government is obviously playing a key role in terms of what happens in the camps and how do we coordinate all those relief efforts. I've not had the opportunity yet to meet with the military leaders in Myanmar, and there's still a request in. All I can say is I'm in good company. There's a lot of other people who haven't met with them either.
You're not talking to very many people.
So, I'm going back to the region, and I hope in February. I hope that all those permits and visas and everything will be allowed to happen.
I guess the thing I'm trying to figure out here, though, is has anybody over there explained to your satisfaction why the Myanmar government feels this need to crack down so strictly on this group of people?
Well, it's a complicated story, and I try to make it relatively sort of not easy, but just to give you a bit of an introduction. The view from within the Myanmar political community broadly, and this is not just the military and not just the government, is that there are groups that are truly native to Myanmar, and then there are groups that are not native to Myanmar, and for whatever reason. And we can all debate the reason. The view constitutionally is the Rohingya are not part of the club.
Even though they've been there 800 years.
Well, some of them have, but many of them have not. And that's what makes it more complicated. And again, the British, when they set up Burma as part of the Indian Empire, got rid of the boundary. There are no borders or boundaries at that time. All of Burma and all of India were ruled by the same group, the British, in the 19th century. And so there was a lot more movement of population between India, what is now Bangladesh, and what is Myanmar. And so there's no question that there's a long-standing Muslim presence in Myanmar, no doubt about that. Long-standing presence in Rakhine State, the old kingdom of Arakan, going back, many, many centuries. But the Rohingya came, I think most of the Rohingya came probably in the late 18th, early 19th century, and through the time of the British Empire after that time. So you got to kind of look at it from a broad perspective of saying, what does it take? I mean, as Canadians, we don't get this, right?
Right.
I mean, you've been here for 3 years, you become a citizen. Mm-hmm. And our notions of membership in the family are not based on ethnicity in terms of our constitution. It's not the case with Myanmar. There are 135 ethnic groups that are identified in the current constitution.
But even so, if you're not part of the club, how does that possibly justify the kinds of excesses here?
It doesn't. It doesn't justify the exclusion. It doesn't justify the failure to move forward on reconciliation. And that's really what Kofi Annan said in his report. Kofi Annan was asked by Aung San Suu Kyi to chair a panel which had a majority of Myanmar citizens as to what can be done about the situation of the Rohingya. Even the word Rohingya is contested within Myanmar. The government in Myanmar does not use the word Rohingya, and immediately when it's used, they say, well, wait a minute, who do you mean? Because the Rohingya means, in the dialect, it means a person from, a member of Rakhine, somebody from Rakhine State. So as far as the establishment view in Myanmar is, even using the word is contested because it means that you're from there.
And they don't think they are.
And they say, well, wait a minute, you're not really from it. But the question it seems to me, is, and this is not just a Canadian issue, it's a world issue, is stateless people are in the worst of all worlds. They have no access to citizenship, no access to passports, no access to political participation, no access to land rights and all kinds of other rights that are critical to how you get on in a country. And I think it's time now to deal with this issue, which is why, every international observer that's gone there, everybody from the UN to anywhere else, has said you really have to figure out a way to create the path to citizenship. You can't continue to block that path or make it as difficult as it has proven to be.
They can't figure that out in the United States. How are they going to figure that out in Myanmar?
Well, that's what the Myanmaris will often say. Is say we're not the only country that has this issue. I mean, don't tell me, Mr. Rae, you don't have issues in Canada with respect to Indigenous people and their perception of injustice. And I will fully say to them, yeah, that's not an issue. Of course we do. Of course we have an issue. It's not about our lecturing to you, but it's about dealing with a problem that is absolutely not, it's not in any way sustainable. And what's happened in the conflict that's intensified that in the last few months has made that even more clear. This is not a sustainable situation.
I think one thing that's so perplexing is Aung San Suu Kyi is a former Nobel Prize winner, and we've probably all, or many of us anyway, been to U2 concerts where Bono used to say, I'm dedicating this concert to her when she was under house arrest. She was a human rights hero, and now she is sort of presiding over this country where these excesses are taking place. How does this make any sense?
Well, first of all, she's not presiding over the country. I mean,
Prime
I think
Minister.
that, well, she's not the Prime Minister.
Not technically,
no,
but essentially.
But she's not. You've got to understand, the military, when they rewrote the Constitution on their own in 2008, said the military will retain control of 25% of the seats in Parliament. We will have a block on any further constitutional change. We will control the ministries of defense, home security, which is the critical one for our purposes of this discussion, border, equally critical, yep. And we're in charge of all that. And other parties can be responsible for other stuff like health and education and other things.
So she has no power here.
The defense budget in Myanmar is bigger than the health and education budgets combined. So think about that for a moment.
Talks about their priorities.
Who is really, yes, and who is really running the country. Right. So Aung San Suu Kyi is the state councillor. She's the head of the political party that forms the government in Parliament. But I think it's important to understand that the challenge that she faced, and she's now become, if you like, as a result of having been released from house arrest, run in an election, won the most seats in that election, and become the leader of her party, and given this totally made up, if you like, a designation of being state councillor. She's the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the government, but she's not the president. She's not the prime minister. She's not allowed to run for president. What has she done? Well, she set up the Annan Commission. She's called for reconciliation, and she's taking additional steps now to say, well, how does repatriation happen? All of which is not to say she's not responsible for what's happening. I'm not saying that. All of which is not to say she could do more. I'm sure that's a view that's widely held. Certainly I hold it. But it's to say there has to be some appreciation for the fact that historically, yeah, she had a lot to do with this, quote, transition to democracy. But it's the next stage in the transition to democracy that is crucial, because you can't suddenly say, well, we're going to be democratic except for this 1.5 million people who we're going to treat in a totally different, separate way that becomes politically unsustainable. And I think that's the challenge that we now face.
And when you hear about efforts in this country to potentially strip her of her honorary Canadian citizenship or other honorifics, how do you react to that?
Well, first of all, the Prime Minister hasn't asked me to opine on that.
I am.
No, you are. I got that. You and I have known each other long enough to know that's what's going to happen. Well, first of all, I'm not going to give an opinion to Parliament will make up. This whole question of honorary citizenship is kind of an improvised thing that we did for Mandela. And then, others have been added, the Aga Khan, Aung San Suu Kyi, like different governments at different times. To me, and, she's received not only the Nobel Prize, but I don't know how many umpteen honorary degrees, sure. Keys to cities, all kinds of honors. I really think that's a bit of a diversion from where we need to be focusing right now. I mean, nobody's. I personally don't think it's the core nub of what we need to be focused on.
Okay, so fair enough. Let's get back to what the focus is. A cynical person, when you ask the very first question, which is, what impact can Canada have in trying to bring some kind of positive results here? A cynical person would say, none. Now, I know you long enough to know that you've been involved in other dangerous parts of the world and have had some positive impact on things. I think of Sri Lanka, for example. In which case, what do you think you specifically and Canada generally can do here?
I think the key thing is you work with others. I mean, Canada's strength in any international effort is not what we do or what speeches we make. It's about how effectively we can identify a set of issues and say to other countries, we think these are 3 critical issues. Let's work together on them. Let's build up enough effort. Let's work with the UN and with the agencies of the UN to do that. And let's be part of that collective effort. It's not about Canada on its own. I mean, it's about our ability to work to kind of persuade others to work together and to be part of that group of people who decide to do that. That seems to me requires some degree of leadership and also knowledge. So you've got a strong factual basis. So you've got all the eyes and ears of all of our diplomats and others working to kind of build up that knowledge collectively. And it's about helping to make it happen. It's not like an ego thing where you make it happen yourself. It's about, well, how effectively can you work with others to make it happen? And I think that's where we can do stuff and we can make a difference. One of the advantages that we have is that we're not a country that has other interests or baggage with respect to Myanmar.
Mm-hmm. We're not there for the oil, for example.
We're not there for the oil. We're not. We don't have. The Brits have this whole imperial past to deal with.
So we're seen as an honest broker?
We can be seen as one of a number of brokers, but it's not about us doing it alone. It's about us doing it with other countries. And one of the things that I've been trying to do in New York, where I'm headed tomorrow, to deal with these questions, Geneva, working with other diplomats, working with the UN agencies. This is all part of an effort to engage in a way that says, and we also have to be prepared to put our money where our mouth is. So when we look at the camp situation over a long period of time, we need to understand as a country that this is going to cost money. And it's not something you can say, we believe all this needs to be done, but we're not prepared to put any resources into it. So we'll see whether politically that's what the government decides to do. I'm a special envoy, and I make recommendations to the government. And
no, you propose, they dispose.
They dispose as the government, but my strong recommendation to the government will be, if we're serious about dealing with these 3 critical questions, the camps, the political process in Myanmar, and the issue of accountability, we need to be prepared to put some resources into each of those 3 questions.
Let's finish up on this. Normally, in crises such as these, the United States is a significant player. Given the utter political dysfunction that country is going through right now, what kind of a role are they able to play right now?
Well, not as much as they might have played in other circumstances, but there's some elements of strong continuity in can I use the word deep state within the United States? So, when you talk to people in the State Department, when you talk to, American diplomats in the countries in the region, and at the United Nations, they're very engaged. They're not disengaged. They are very much part of that discussion. But it is a bit, and Minister Freeland talked about this in one of the speeches she gave in the House of Commons. It's a fact that we have to accept that one of the reasons why I think Canada wants to be back on this stage, and I think it should be back on this stage in a significant way, is because there's room for that to happen. There's a willingness, I think, on the part of many countries to say, yeah, we are going to have to figure out what we're going to do, whereas perhaps at other points in time, that might have been led by the administration in Washington. It's not clear to me that that is something that is going to be led by the president, but it doesn't mean that the Americans are absent from the field. It just means there's a greater opportunity for a lot of other countries, including Canada, to say, what more can we do? And then what more can others do in response to that?
Never thought I'd hear Bob Rae and Steve Bannon both talk about the deep state. You guys, strange bedfellows. There we go. Mr. Rae, we wish you a safe trip back to the region and look forward to talking to you when you get back.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.